quý vị, hôm nay chúng tôi có mặt tại Trung tâm Việt Nam để tham dự buổi ra mắt sách Running on Empty của diễn giả và cũng là đồng tác giả, đó là ông Molloy đến từ Ottawa. Và năm nay ông cũng đã lớn tuổi thưa quý vị, nhưng mà không ngại vượt đường xa đến đây để có buổi ra mắt sách với cộng đồng người Việt của chúng ta. Và như quý vị biết là sách Running on Empty là của 4 tác giả viết về biến cố lịch sử của đất nước Canada và đã cứu giúp 70.000 người tị nạn Đông Dương, và đa số trong đó là người Việt Nam. Thời gian từ năm 1975 đến năm 1980, và có thể nói đây là một sự kiện di dời ngoạn mục trên toàn thế giới. Và xin mời quý vị cùng xem lại một số hình ảnh của chúng tôi ghi nhận trong buổi ra mắt sách vào ngày 28 tháng 10 năm 2018 hôm nay. Và
It's a great honor for me to be with you today for your book launch.
I know that the book you already published in last year, 2017.
The book is almost 600 pages. How long did it take you and the author to write the book?
Nice to be here in Edmonton, and I've been very impressed to see the impact that the Vietnamese people have had on this city. We've toured some areas where the streets have street signs that are made by the Vietnamese. Quite impressive. Spent 5 years working on the book. The first year was spent mainly at the National Archives, looking at the government's files on the boat people, and we made copies of over 1,000 documents. Then we put them in order, and that helped us to tell the story of all the decisions that were made and how the operation worked. We also got in touch with all the people who had worked on the program 40 years ago. So it took the research part took 18 months, and then it took a little over 3 years to write it and get it to the point where we could actually send it to the publisher.
wow, it's taken about like 3 years. That's so long.
Yes, it was a
Okay.
a long but interesting project, and but we were never bored. It was so interesting to hear about just our first interaction with the people from Vietnam as Canadians.
What is your passionate about the book?
I think what makes me excited about the book is that the Indo-Chinese refugees, Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians, are the largest single group of refugees to ever come to Canada. And 30 years later, we realized that aside from a few studies that were done in the first 10 years, nobody had bothered to tell the story. And so we thought, for the future generations of Vietnamese Canadians, they deserve to know how it was they got here. So what was exciting to me was to be able to create the story, the history of how the government of Canada decided, the people of Canada decided that we would open our doors. And so to me, it's an exciting story about a group of people who are in great need, a group of people who recognize the need, and then the third part of the story is how well that those Vietnamese and other people from Southeast Asia did, and the contributions they made to Canada. So to me, it's an inspiring story.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what challenges you face and how you overcome them?
Well, the challenge was trying to tell a very, very complicated story in English that is easy to read. That was the hard part. It's often difficult to write about complicated things in ways where you don't lose the reader. And so we worked really hard. It's not simple English, but to have clear writing. That was the biggest difficulty we faced when you're dealing with such a complex, long-running phenomenon that we were dealing with. So telling the story with clarity was the biggest challenge.
That four authors wrote the book.
It's a lot of ideas put in together
Exactly.
to make a wonderful book.
Yeah.
So when talking about the refugees, what do you remember the most from them?
Well, I think when I think of those times, the first thing I remember was the terrifying images that we were seeing on television of boats arriving near a shore, and the boat turns over and people disappear, in front of your very eyes. And people are dragging their children out of the surf, and so there was first that I think all Canadians felt, that the terror of the situation. But then as we we sent our teams out and we became more familiar with I think what we remembered most was the courage of the people. I mean, to take the risk of getting into a boat when you know that maybe one in three doesn't make it. The pirates, the storms, the seas, the terrible conditions in the camp. I think what I felt, and what comes through in the stories that we have in the book, is how much our people came to admire the refugees for their courage and the fact that they sang. They sang. Some of our officers can still sing songs in Vietnamese that they learned in the camps. So we realized that this was a very remarkable group of people, and I think so. That's what we remember most. I think some of my colleagues still are suffering from the terrible things they saw. When coming down to the edge of the water in the morning and finding 100 bodies floating in the water. One colleague went on a boat after it was landed, and they got everybody off, and there seemed to be a pile of rags. And when they came over, they realized it wasn't a pile of rags. It was a girl whose arm got caught in the flywheel of the engine and ripped off. And she was lying there, and all they'd been able to do was cover it up. And the officer said to the UN official with him, "You bring her to life, she's ours." And 3 or 4 weeks later, he encountered her getting on a plane to Canada, and we built her life. The other terrible thing, so many of the women who encountered pirates on the way arrived in refugee camps in terrible conditions. And our rule was, when you find them, you put them on the next plane. And there were people in Canada, all across the country, who were prepared to receive these women and to look after them when they came to Canada. But there were lots of horrible things.
So right now, are you working on any project related to the refugee
Well, yes.
people?
The book tells the story of the people who came to Canada between 1975 and 1980. The question is, what happened after that? And so right now I'm involved in a brand new project. It's just been funded by the government of Canada. We call it Hearts of Freedom. And we are going to collect a minimum of 100 oral histories from Indo-Chinese refugees from across the country. We're going to get them to tell us the story of how and why they left, how they escaped, the life in the camps, how it was they came to Canada, what do they remember about their first day in Canada, and then to tell us about their life in Canada since. And we hope to collect at least 100 of these stories, and from that do another book that looks at what happens when this book ends. So we'll have the full story, the part of the story about how the Canadians responded, and the part of the story about the Vietnamese experience. So that's the new project. Hearts of Freedom, it's called.
That's wonderful. Besides this book, did you write any other book?
I wrote 3 books on the history of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, okay.
Yes.
So
a
that's
totally different part of my career.
Okay.
Part of my career was dealing with refugees. Part of my career was dealing with efforts to make peace in the Middle East. 2 different things. We decided we would figure out how to make peace in Jerusalem. Who knows if it'll work? Well, I think for the Vietnamese people in Canada, I think the message is keep doing what you're doing. When the Vietnamese arrived in this country, they were the poorest part of the country for 20 years. The children who arrived here, as small children, had the highest high school dropout rate and the highest university completion rate of any community in Canada. So some people weren't successful, others were more successful than anybody else in Canada. After 30 years, the Vietnamese community is the highest performing community in Canada in terms of educational attainment, in terms of professional qualifications. So whatever you're doing it right. And you are, and I would say to the Vietnamese community that we are so lucky that you came to Canada.
Và kính thưa quý vị, vừa qua là cuộc trả lời phỏng vấn của ông Michael. Thì nếu quý vị muốn tìm hiểu thêm về những gì mà tác giả gợi gắm trong cuốn sách thì xin quý vị hãy tìm mua cho được cuốn sách này, bởi vì cuốn sách này nó rất là quý giá đến mọi người Việt Nam chúng ta, và nhất là các thế hệ trẻ, younger generation. So kính mong quý vị sẽ mua. What's the price for the book?
The book, as I think it's, I think it's $32.
32. Và giá của cuốn sách là $32 quý vị. Mọi gia đình chúng ta nên phải có để cho thế hệ con em trẻ biết về cuốn sách, biết về lịch sử của những người tị nạn đến Canada như thế nào. Thank you for your great work that you have done in the past for helping the Indo-Chinese refugee and wrote this wonderful book. So we wish you a good health, and in the future we wish you come back here again for a new book launch. Thank you so much.
My great pleasure. My great pleasure.
Kính thưa quý vị, tên tôi là Tường Vi, tôi được cái nhã ý, được cái nhã của Hội Người Việt mời lên đây để làm MC cho buổi ra mắt sách hôm nay. Tôi rất là hoan hỉ có tất cả mọi người đây. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vi Nguyen. I'm here to be an MC for today. And today we have the program that maybe I could go through a little bit. Kính thưa quý vị, đầu tiên hết chúng ta sẽ có quốc ca, và sau đó thì có lời ngỏ của Hội Người Việt Edmonton, và chúng tôi sẽ đi qua phần giới thiệu quan khách just mau thôi, và sau đó thì giới thiệu diễn giả, rồi có cái bài nói chuyện của ông Mike Molloy, và sau đó chúng ta sẽ giải đáp thắc mắc và bán sách và ký tên lưu niệm, và sau đó cuối cùng là có cái tiệc nhẹ thân mật diễn ra đây luôn, ở trong căn phòng này luôn. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a program. Just briefly, we have national anthems, and we have opening remarks from the Edmonton Viet Association, and we have recognition of guests, and we have the speaker's introduction, Mr. Mike Molloy, and also we have the question period after his presentation, and we have book sale and autograph, and we have refreshment following. Để mở đầu chương trình, xin quý vị đứng lên để làm lễ chào quốc kỳ và 1 phút mặc niệm. Please rise for the national anthem and 1 minute of silence.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ
đây là 1 phút mặc niệm để tưởng nhớ đến các chiến sĩ và đồng bào đã hy sinh vì tự do, dân chủ. 1 minute of silence for people who sacrificed for freedom and democracy. Phút mặc niệm bắt đầu. Phút mặc niệm chấm dứt. Xin mời quý vị an tọa. Sau đây xin mời cô Dương Amy. Dương Amy là hội trưởng trẻ nhất của chúng ta. Amy mới lên hội trưởng cách đây chừng tháng thôi, nhưng mà Amy đã rất là xung phong vào những công việc và hoạt động rất là tích cực. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I like to present Amy Dương. She is the youngest president of the Viet Association so far, and she's very hardworking. Just about a month already, and then she's already does a lot of work, for the role. So please welcome Amy Dương.
Hello everyone, welcome to all of our representatives, guests and participants today. On behalf of the Edmonton Viet Association, I would like to express my warm welcome and thanks to all of you who are present today at the launch of Mr. Mike Molloy's book launch for his book, Running on Empty. I believe that today we will hear and learn more about the sacrifice of Canadians who have extended their arms to keep us and help us find democracy and have our families enjoy a new home here in Canada. Kính chào quý đại diện, các hội đoàn, quý quan khách và các tham dự. Tôi xin thay mặt Hội Người Việt ngỏ lời chào mừng và cảm ơn đến tất cả quý vị có mặt trong buổi ra mắt sách Running on Empty của ông Molloy hôm nay. Tôi tin tưởng rằng chúng ta sẽ được nghe và hiểu biết thêm về sự hy sinh của những người gia nã đói đã mở rộng vòng tay, giúp chúng ta và gia đình được hưởng ấm, no và hạnh phúc trên một quê hương mới. Thank you.
Thưa quý vị, cái buổi ra mắt sách hôm nay được tổ chức bởi Hội Người Việt Edmonton và dưới sự bảo trợ của Hội Việt Nam Việt Nam Canada, bác sĩ Trần Devi Nhung and nha sĩ Hoàng Đình Trí and the neighborhood engagement. The book launch today is organized by the the Edmonton Viet Association, and also under the sponsorship of the Vietnamese Canadian Friendship Society, Dr. Nhung Tran Davies and Dr. Trí Hoàng and the neighborhood engagement. Oh yes, also we have Vietbest. Thank you. Okay, so tôi xin lướt qua một chút xíu về giới thiệu về cái sách này, tên là Running on Empty. Dịch nôm na đó có nghĩa là hết xăng rồi mà vẫn chạy. Họ muốn nói về một số người nhân viên của Gia Nã Đại lúc đó họ đã hết, nghĩa là coi như họ phải dốc hết toàn sức lực ra để mà mang 60.000 người tị nạn Đông Dương của chúng ta sang đây. Quyển sách này đó là một cái tài liệu lịch sử quý giá, viết bởi 4 cựu nhân viên di trú của Canada, ghi nhận lại cái nguyên nhân và tiến trình của việc thu nhận, di tản và ổn định cho 60.000 người tị nạn Đông Dương trên toàn cõi Canada. Hành động nhân đạo này đã khiến Canada là một quốc gia duy nhất được tặng thưởng có huy chương cao quý Nelson của Liên Hiệp Quốc về tị nạn. Tài liệu này sẽ giúp cho thế hệ trẻ hiểu rõ hơn về sự hy sinh của thế hệ cha ông và những người đã mở vòng tay đón nhận họ để chúng ta được sống trong một cái tự do và một cái đời sống tự do và no ấm như hôm nay. Sách dày 582 trang do nhà xuất bản McGill University Press phát hành với giá là 40 đồng một quyển. Đặc biệt hôm nay với sự bảo trợ của Hội Người Việt Edmonton, sách chỉ bán với giá 30 đồng một quyển. 32 đồng. I could see that. 30 thôi, một quyển với chữ ký của tác giả. Vì số sách hôm nay có hạn, sẽ ưu tiên cho những người có mặt tại chỗ. Nhưng mà nếu thiếu chúng tôi có thể order thêm cùng giá, nhưng sách sẽ về vào khoảng cuối tháng 11. Hoặc quý vị có thể order online với giá đặc biệt của tác giả là 32 đồng một cuốn đến tháng cuối tháng 12 năm 2018. Nó có cái flyer ở trên cái table đó, tức là trên bàn có những cái flyer về đó. Hay là có thể order dưới dạng ebook ở trên Google Play với lại Amazon. Ladies and gentlemen, Running on Empty is a valuable historical document written by 4 former Canadian immigration officers who documented the causes and progress of the evacuation and settlement of over 60,000 Indo-Chinese refugees throughout Canada. This humanitarian act has made Canada the only country to be awarded the United Nations Nobel Peace Prize, Nansen. It's called Nansen. This document will help the younger generations better understand the sacrifices of his older generations and those who have embraced them, so that we can live in today's freedom and liberty. The 582-page book was published by McGill University Press for $40 a book. Especially today, under the sponsorship of the Edmonton Viet Association, the book is available for only $30 each, with the author's signature. Today's book is limited. We will give priority to the person present. If the book kind of run out for sure, we will order more at the same price, but they will come at the end of November. But also, you can order online at the author's special price, $32 each, until the end of December 2018. We have the flyer on the table, or you can order by ebook on Google Play and Amazon. Ok, kính thưa quý vị, sau đây là vài nét về diễn giả. Ông Michael James Molloy, đồng tác giả của Running on Empty, Canada và phong trào tị nạn Đông Dương 75-80, có 40 năm kinh nghiệm trong các vấn đề quốc tế và tị nạn. Ông là đại sứ của Jordan từ năm 1996 cho đến năm 2000 và là điều học viên đặc biệt cho tiến trình hòa bình Trung Đông năm 2000 cho đến năm 2003. Năm 76 đến 78, ông làm giám đốc chính trị chính sách tị nạn. Ông lãnh đạo và soạn thảo các điều khoản tị nạn của đạo luật nhập cư năm 1976, bao gồm người tị nạn nguyên thủy và các diện thân nhân bảo lãnh, chương trình tài trợ người tị nạn tư nhân và chương trình học sinh tị nạn WUSC. Năm 1979 và năm 80, ông cộng tác trong chương trình tị nạn Đông Dương, lúc đó là mình đến đó, đã mang 60.000 người tị nạn đến Canada. Ông đã trực tiếp tham gia vào các phong trào di dân của Tiệp Khắc năm 1968 và Uganda, Á Châu năm 1972. Ông là cố vấn của các vấn đề nhân đạo của phái đoàn Canada và Geneva năm 1981 đến năm 1984 và quản lý các hoạt động nhập cư và tị nạn của Jordan, Syria, Đông Phi và Ontario. Ông là chủ tịch Hội lịch sử di dân Canada. Well, there is a few things about the author today. Mr. Michael James Molloy is the co-author of The Running on Empty, Canada and the Indo-Chinese Refugee Movement, 1975 to 80, has 40 years experience in international and refugee affairs. He was the ambassador to Jordan 1996 to 2000 and the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process year 2000 to 03. As Director of Refugee Policy 1976 to 1978, he designed the refugee provisions of the 1976 Immigration Act, including the Convention Refugee and Designated Classes, the Private Refugee Sponsorship Program, and the WUSC Refugee Student Program. In 1979 and 1980, he coordinated the Indo-Chinese Refugee Program that brought 60,000 refugees to Canada. He was directly involved in the Czechoslovakia 1968 and Uganda Asian 1972 refugee movement, was a counselor of humanitarian affairs at the Canadian mission in Geneva 1981 and 84, and managed immigration and refugee operations in Jordan, Syria, East Africa, and Ontario. It's really heavy. It's really a heavy kind of biography. Okay, he is the president of the Canadian Immigration Historical Society. So, xin quý vị chào đón ông Molloy. So please welcome Mr. Michael James Molloy.
It's always a big gamble when you get up in a strange place with technology that was invented long after I was born, and trying to I hope it all comes together. So we shall see. First of all, I'd like to thank the Edmonton Vietnamese community for sponsoring my visit to Edmonton today. I was telling Dr. Tri Hang the last time I was here was in the summer of 1978, when I came out to tell the refugee organizations in Edmonton, you better get ready. There's something happening in Southeast Asia, and you better get ready, because we don't know how big it's going to be, but it's going to be big. And oh, by the way, if you'd like to sponsor some, here's how you do it. So that's the last time I was here. I've noticed a few new buildings in traveling around the city today, and I was impressed to find an entire street and district that seems to have the imprint of the Vietnamese community on it. And it's amazing to see what this city has done, and the last time I was here, and it's amazing to see what you have done. So, at the same time, just a couple of words about the book. I'm a member of a very strange little organization called the Canadian Immigration Historical Society, that was actually founded by immigration officers at a time when you could count all of the immigration historians in Canada on 2 fingers. And we thought, if we don't start telling our own story, it's not going to get told. We discovered in the early part of this millennium that despite the fact that so many refugees had come from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, the largest single movement of refugees to this date to this country. There are 300,000 Vietnamese in Canada now, and probably another 100,000 Laotians and Cambodians, that the historians had largely ignored it. And we thought, this can't be right. We also knew that because we heard from our colleagues, particularly those who were out in Thailand and Malaysia and all those other places where the boats landed up, that there were all sorts of astonishing stories, sad stories, tragic stories, hilariously funny stories, the whole gamut of the human experience, that were going to disappear because we were all now, if you were a young officer in the immigration department at that time, by definition, if you're still alive, you're in your 70s. And when they go, we lose the stories. So we decided about 6 or 7 years ago that we would tell the story, and we spent 18 months doing the research. I have 1,000 government documents that we photographed. We wrote to every single person that was still alive who worked on it and said, tell us your story, and we put the book together, and it came out 2 years ago now. There's bad news and there's good news. The bad news is the second of 1,000 books has now been sold out. The last 30 of them are here. The good news is they'll be printing more, in another 500 in 2 weeks' time, so that there will be more books available. For a non-fiction book in Canada to sell 1,000 is really quite remarkable. And we discovered it's being used in university courses, in law schools across the country, in history courses and other places. And the leading thing I just love, the leading immigration historians told me recently that 3 of them had written a new book, and it was sent back to them saying, we can't publish this because you didn't provide any citations to running on empty. So I said to them, serves you right. Just a word about the title. There's a very famous James Jackson Browne rock and roll song called Running on Empty that came out 2 years before the program. And when I was in the course of the 2 years that I worked on this, coming home at night, often at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, to find my children that had been in bed for hours and my wife wasn't going to stick around that much longer, and all that would go through my head was that song, because we were putting in 12 and 14 hours a day and we were running on empty. And if we were running on empty at the center in Canada, you can only imagine what the guys and gals out in the camps of Southeast Asia were running on. So this book is about that, and we wrote it for you. First and foremost, we have all sorts of other audiences, but we felt your children and your grandchildren deserved to know how they got here. And so that's what the book is about, and we hope that it will be something that is of value to you. And we think it's part of the process of blending your history into Canada's history. It becomes one history at this point. So if we can move along. So if the Indo-Chinese refugee movement to Canada, we still call it the big one because it is the biggest one. About 135,000 people in all initially. So, okay, please. So, the communist victory in April 1975 in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. The Canadian cabinet met to decide what to do. There were very few linkages between Canada and Vietnam at that time, but they said, okay, they directed the immigration office through a department to do things. If refugees show up and they've got relatives in Canada, get them. Yeah. And in addition, we give you a quota of 3,000 convention refugees to pick up other people along the way wherever you find them, who express an interest in coming. So those were the original orders. As you know, for reasons only best known to them, the American military decided to pick up all the refugees that have been rescued at sea and taken to Hong Kong and the Philippines and put them in Guam. Guam, beautiful Guam. Guam is not at the end of the world, but you can see the end of the world from Guam for sure. Conditions there were terrible, but within days of the refugees arriving there, a key team of our officers arrived from Hong Kong, and over the next couple of weeks they sent close to 2,000 people to Canada. Then, in their wisdom, the American military picked everybody up and they dumped them in military camps, starting in Camp Pendleton, California, right across the southern United States, to Ellis Air Force Base in Florida, and up to Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. And again, Canadian teams fanned out to those camps, and we selected anybody who had any kind of link to Canada, or essentially anybody who wanted to come to Canada. And then gradually, other people showed up in other places, and our operations around the world started to pick them up. By the end of that first year, we had approximately 7,000, mainly Cambodian and Vietnamese in Canada, along with about 1,000 students who were already here. Over the next 2 years, as it seemed the movement was dying away, that was what it looked like, that's what we thought it was, we brought in another 2,000. So, and that figure of 9,000 is larger than the number of Ugandan Asians we brought earlier, larger than the number of people from Chile and Argentina we brought. So it was already a pretty big movement, but it was done kind of quietly. There wasn't much public support, largely because a rather notorious general by the name of Dang Van Quang showed up in Canada through the family unification road, and the Vietnamese community in Canada said, why have you brought this man in? Created quite a scandal, and at the end of the day, the government enthusiasm, church enthusiasm, public enthusiasm, and media enthusiasm died away. And in the immigration department, our job was to keep it going regardless of that. We keep it going, and so about 1,000 a year came in. So, now, that's 1975. 1976, the first new immigration act since the early 1950s came in. And it's the first immigration act of Canada that actually mentions the word refugees. And it had all sorts of useful and interesting things in it. The first thing was the possibility of, instead of using the UN definition of refugee, which is a very high test about persecution, we were allowed to make up definitions to meet the characteristics of the particular group that the government wanted to bring in. And so we actually did three. One for people from Eastern Europe, one from people who were still in their own country and needed to be treated like refugees, because refugees by definition have to be outside. And we decided we wanted to designate the people from Indochina, because we thought persecution is not what this is about. This is getting away from something much more terrible than persecution and taking terrible risks to do it. So let's just have a definition. If we go on to the next one. And by doing that, the people were allowed to be treated as if they were refugees. In other words, they could be selected the same way, exempt from the convention definition, exempt from the point system, eligible for sponsorship, and the same settlement package that refugees got. But it was you put a different filter on the system. Okay, so the definition was really simple. You had to be a citizen of one of those three countries up there. You had to have run away after the fall of Saigon. You had to be not selected by somebody else. In other words, you couldn't have, if you had an Australian visa, go to Australia. So nowhere else to go, and not wanting to go home, and you had to stumble into one of our offices or up to one of our offices and say, I want to go to Canada. That was the definition. So that made it possible to do all the paperwork in about 12 minutes. We didn't have to listen to a long story about why you ran away. We didn't care. What we knew was, very quickly we learned, if we don't take people quickly out of the camps, boats won't be allowed to land. People will die. It's a very simple bit of protection. So you move them out fast, they land. You move them out slow, they drown. So we wanted our officers to be able to do the whole thing in 12 minutes. And that involved throwing out the normal immigration documentation, coming up with a 2-page form where we filled in the stuff at the interview, who this family is, medical, security, criminality, boat number, flight number, there's your visa. That was it, just like that. One piece of paper did everything. So that really helped. The second thing that we designed as a result of that act was the private sponsorship program. And that was something we did because we wanted to expand the number of refugees coming to Canada. The government would only give us so much money, and we thought, okay, if we can set up a system where private groups, churches, even groups of neighbors can come together and put together a package, raise a little bit of money, and can come in and make a formal application, we will not only bring those people in if we can find them, we will count them above the quota. So in other words, if you and this group of 5 people sponsors a refugee in, though that refugee will add to the total that are coming to Canada. It's over and above. I went across the country in the summer of '78 with 2 messages on behalf of the government. The first message was, hey, we've got a brand new toy for you to play with. It's called the Refugee Sponsorship Program. Here's how it works. You guys should think about it. And guess what? You get to decide, in many cases, who's coming to Canada. Isn't that a wonderful deal? And it's over and above the quota. So, and the second message was, watch what's coming onto your television sets about what's happening out there in Southeast Asia. And government hasn't made any more decisions yet, but we know in our bones that something big and horrible is happening, and sooner or later, we are going to have to do something about that. So that's the message I took across the country, even to this very town, and I discovered 2 years ago as a result of that, the Catholic Immigrant Service, or Family Services here, began to hold meetings teaching people about sponsorship and learning about the boat people, so that months later, when the government put out the call, Edmonton was ready. Edmonton was ready. It's really quite something. I never imagined that something I said actually resulted in something happening. It was quite a revelation at this time in my life to discover that. So, please. So we get this turning point in 1978. We begin to learn about the horrors that had been inflicted in Cambodia, where everybody with glasses was executed. In Laos, where we thought things were going to be easier, it turns out they weren't being easier. There was this, instead of re-education camps, they had what they called seminars, same thing, and they were exterminating the hill people. And of course, you know what was happening in Vietnam. You had the persecution of the middle class, and class enemies, the re-education camps, the new economic zones, ethnic cleansing of the Chinese minorities, and just a pressure becoming unbearable to the population. You all know that, and we could see that from Canada. The news was picking up, and more importantly, the officers we had stationed in that area were reporting back to us about a worsening situation. So this is what we were seeing on our TV sets at night, and this had the impact in Canada that horrible picture of that little Syrian boy had. People saw this night after night, these boats coming in and tipping over as they hit the beach, and the people going over the side, and some of them coming up, and some of them not coming up. And that was what was, and people in Canada began to say, shouldn't we be doing, isn't it something we should be doing something about? So we began to get that groundswell in our population. So, just a quick thing on the refugee escape routes. We eventually were picking up refugees as far away as Tokyo and Seoul in the east, and we don't show the maps there, but we were picking them up in the Persian Gulf and in Istanbul. They get picked up by boat, and next thing you know, they're somewhere else. But they were going overland mainly into Thailand to get escaping Laos and Cambodia, and then in the case of the Vietnamese, getting on boats and ending up in all sorts of strange places across the South China Sea, if they made it at all. So, in every refugee problem for Canada, there's a tipping point. There's a point where all of a sudden the weight of the government goes from standing aside to we're involved. And that tipping point actually happened in the last few days of November through December and the first day or two of January, 78, 79. First of all, a ship called the Hai Hong, which was chartered by Chinese gangsters to carry people from Hanoi. 1,000 people were supposed to get on. The Vietnamese government put 2,500 people on a boat about 3 times as long as this room. They were supposed to make a run for Hong Kong. They had a typhoon. They ended up on Malaysia. Word came out that they had paid for their passage. Well, they're not refugees. They're tourists, obviously. So the Malaysians wouldn't let them land. Everybody else said no, they paid for their passage, they can't be refugees. Eventually, the Minister of Immigration of Quebec called up the Minister, Cullen, the federal minister, and said, whatever you decide to do, Quebec will take 1/3. And for Mr. Cullen, was his tipping point. And he called our officer in Singapore, Ian Hamilton, and said, get up to KL, and get down to the harbor, and I'm sending you 3 or 4 airplanes in the next, and the next one's coming. The first one's coming in 3 days. You can take 600 people. So a little team, 3 federal and 1 Quebec officers went out. The Malaysians wouldn't let them go on the boat. They parked a minesweeper between the boat and the shore, and they brought people over under armed guards on Zodiacs, and our people selected them as they came. They got 70 the first day, and then more delays, and then several hundred in the next 2 days. At 2 o'clock in the morning, they were counting them up because the plane was going to be landing, and they realized they'd counted a family of 11 twice. So they were below. And Ian went and woke up the Malaysian police, got in another Zodiac, went out to the boat, banged on the side, and selected 3 people over the rail. And the next morning they took them, they were on their way to Canada. Now, when those 600 people arrived, they were taken to the military base in Montreal, and the Quebec Immigration Minister and the Federal Immigration Minister and the Canadian media all came there. And the message it sent was, we can do something about this. We can do something. Canada has the power to go and rescue people off this boat. This is something we can do. So that was the first thing that happened. All of a sudden, the Quebec cabinet, the federal cabinet, all the other provincial governments realized there's a big problem, we can do something about it. The second thing that happened was the UN called an emergency meeting in Geneva. And we sent a big team there, and they ran away like that. And the UN basically said, we haven't seen anything like this since the end of the Second World War. You've really got to do something about it. So, and the report from that meeting was attached to the cabinet document that went into cabinet a few days later, and the cabinet decided we'll have a refugee plan this year, 10,000, 5,000 for Indo-Chinese, and we know that that's the beginning, not the end. The cabinet document says at the end, if you need more at any time, you come back to us, and in any event, we want to hear from you in June because we know we're going to have to do more. So that gets the ball rolling. And at the same time, that very month, the Indo-Chinese designated class, which simplifies the whole business of selecting these people, comes out of the system. And now we've got a really good selection tool, which makes it so much simpler to give the people permanent status in Canada. And the Mennonite Central Committee calls us up and said, we've just had a meeting. We'd like to strike a deal with you about sponsoring refugees, and we want the Central Committee of the Mennonites to be responsible if anything goes wrong, rather than the taxpayer. Can we negotiate with you? So those things happened in a 5-week period, and the government of Canada tilted in the direction of helping. And when the Mennonites jumped in, all sorts of other churches jumped in. And so gradually the whole posture of Canada went from indifference to engagement. So here's just to line up the decisions that come down. As I said, the Liberals agreed to do 5,000 and they're making the plan for the next year in December. Then Joe Clark's government comes in, and right away they see this as an issue that has to be dealt with. And they say initially in June, a month after they're in office, we will up the 5,000 to 8,000, and there's this sponsorship program. Maybe the sponsors can bring in 4,000. So that's their decision. 1 month later, they go back to cabinet and they say, this won't do, it's got to be more. And they decide, there's another meeting coming up in Geneva, this time called by the Secretary General of the United Nations, not the High Commissioner for Refugees, the big boss himself, because it's so serious. And the Conservatives decide, Canada has to lead. Now there's two things that go into that. When the new immigration minister came to his office the first time, the old minister, Bud Cullen, was waiting for him. The old minister had been the law professor of the new minister, and he said to him, among other things, you got a chance to do something really big and powerful for Canada with this problem in Southeast Asia, but you got to act fast before those SOBs in the Treasury Board get their hooks into you. So, you got to act fast, okay? The second thing that happened was that a paper came out that ended up going to the Minister Atke, and it was about the Canadian decision to turn away that ship full of Jewish refugees in 1938, the St. Louis. Right, yeah. And we know that many of the people that we turned away ultimately ended up being killed by the Nazis. And Atke went into that cabinet meeting with that paper, and he went to the Pride Park and he read it out loud to the cabinet ministers. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, how do we want to be remembered? And they said, well, we'll take 50,000 people. Now that was an unheard of number. Nobody had we'd never done that for anybody. So Flora MacDonald then goes off. Now, but just jump ahead. 10 months later, the Liberals are back, and we're just about done with the program, and we say to them, and there's other things happening, and Lloyd Axworthy, Manitoba's very own Lloyd Axworthy, agrees to give us another 10,000 places. So that brings us up to 60,000, okay? Good, so that's it. The heroes of this are Ron Atke, the immigration minister of the day, a bright young lawyer, and Flora MacDonald, Canada's first female foreign minister, fantastic lady, taught me to do Scottish country dancing at one stage in my life. So a very fine person. Flora was dying when we started the book, but we told her about it. And to my eternal sadness, we managed to get 5 copies of the book to Ron Atke 5 days before he went to bed and never woke up. So these two people, who are the heroes of the story, really, didn't get well. I can't believe that Ron had the chance to even read it, but he was involved with us all the way along. Yes, please. Oh. So, now the deal the government made with the people of Canada is the following. It was called the matching formula. They said, we've already got 8,000 in process. 4,000 are already in, there's 4,000 more to come, but they're in the machine. Because we'd been sending reinforcements out, particularly to Singapore and Hong Kong, to bring people in. So that means we've got to bring in, to get to 50,000, we need 42,000 more. And if the private sponsors of this country, who knew where they were or whether they even existed, will bring in 21,000, the government will match it with 21,000. That'll bring us up to 50,000. That was the deal, and it was, of course, it was one of those great BOGO Canadian things: buy one get one free. You bring in a family of 5, they bring in a family of 5. It was a great sales pitch. They eventually screwed it up, but nevertheless, it was a great. So that was the idea, and we were doing a research. We get these correspondence back and forth between the United Nations High Commission for Canada and for refugees and the Canadian government, and the UN is saying, "Oh, it's wonderful. You're going to bring in $50,000, but do you really think your people will actually sponsor them?" It's unheard of. No, it's never happened anywhere. And the answer goes back: sit there and watch. Sit there and watch. And and it went like this. The sponsorship agreement with the Mennonites and 3 other churches were signed in March and April. There were no sponsored refugees in March and April. In May, we had 1,200 refugees sponsored. Flora MacDonald makes her statement on the 22nd of July. End of August, we have 10,000 names. 10,000 names, okay? And by the end of October, the sponsors have left 21,000 in the rearview mirror, and they're on their way to 39,000. So that's how that took off. And that was just the sense that the people out there were suffering and dying, and if we didn't pitch in, we couldn't expect anybody else to do it. So it was really quite an amazing thing. So, okay, well, I'm going to tell you what it says. It says something along the lines of, we had to find, select, process, transport, match with sponsors, and bring to receive, orient, give winter clothing to 60,000 people. Well, of course they were young. And we had 3 categories: small boat escapees, so that's the boat people; overland refugees in Thailand, because we're not boat people, so that was mainly Laos and Cambodians who came across through the minefields. And then there was a category called the pagoda people, which were a strange category that we had to fly out of Vietnam to Paris to process. It was just a few hundred, yeah, that's that. And then there was another group that came in. I think there's about 1,000 more. I think if there's one more. One of the things that the real challenges we were faced with those with the fact that we had all these sponsors coming out of nowhere was that we were initially told by the government, you have to bring in 3,000 people a month. Then they did the math again and they said, no, you have to bring 5,000 people a month in. Okay, 5,000 people a month. Now, when you consider that the entire Ugandan refugee movement was 7,000 people, and coming out of Central America and South America was about 7,000 or 8,000 people. 5,000 a month was was ridiculously high, but we realized that if we didn't want to get them all in and not have them matched up with the sponsors, we'd have a war on our hands. So the question is, how do you do this? So we put together a little group of people we called the Matching Center. And they had 2 things coming at them. They had the sponsorships coming in initially by mail from immigration offices all across the country, by mail. And they would enter them into ledger books. And then they were having what we called notification arrival telexes coming in, saying, on the next 747, you will find the following 514 people. So they're working with their ledger books, and they go to index cards, and eventually they come to me and say, if we don't have a computer, this is going to crash. But there were no. This is 1979. There's no computer, so we put in a request for a computer. There's a huge kickback from the department because all sorts of people have been standing in line for a computer. And they say, you're jumping the queue. Yeah, damn right. So I went up to the deputy minister and said, I took a shopping cart full of index cards and these lists of 500, 600, 700, 800 people. And I said, this cannot be done with the technology we're using. We need a computer. What's the problem? Mrs. So-and-so will let me have one. Mrs. So-and-so's going to be going on vacation tomorrow. You can have it. So in comes, a week later, the matching center people call me and say, our computer has arrived, and it's come with its own person, its own nerd.
Big one.
Yeah, it's about this big, this tall, and it's a big box, and there didn't seem to be any knobs or anything on it, and I wasn't allowed to see it until they'd managed to put all the Ontario cases into it, and so they'd work the weekend, and so I went down with one of my associates to see this thing and what it could do for us, and this nerd, the first one I ever saw, but this tall, little stubby, beard like they have. This little nerd starts talking to us using words I had never heard before in my life. I didn't even think he was speaking English. And so we were getting really frustrated, and he is getting terribly frustrated. And so finally he sort of goes over to one of the matching people, and he has a little argument with her, and he comes back with this roll of ticker tape, which is this tape with paper tape with these little holes in it, which is how the telexes were. That was what the telexes sent back for. And he said, you know what this is? I said, yes, it's ticker tape. You know what it's for? I said, yeah, they throw it out of the windows in parades in New York. He said, no, it goes in the computer system. So he goes over to this computer, and guess what? This is where I began to believe in God again. There was a little slot in the top of the computer. And he put the end of the tape in it, and the computer goes, and it disappears. And across the room, a typewriter, with nobody sitting in front of it, starts to type out the stuff that was on the tape. I mean, I thought, how can this happen? Well, then, of course, we realized that, okay, if we have these notification of arrival telexes with 747s, 500 people on every one of them, sometimes more, coming in, and if we can get the sponsorship applications to come in by telex as well, we can feed them both into the machine. Now at that time, we were having a lot of trouble with the people with the Kitchener-Waterloo area in Ontario. Members of Parliament, the provincial members of Parliament, the mayors, the bishops, the priests, everybody else were phoning and saying, why aren't you sending us any refugees? And I'd go down and complain to the matching people, and they'd say, they'd give the lists of all these people going to Kitchener-Waterloo. So it's just a bunch of sore heads down there, don't worry about it. So when this fellow shows us this miracle, I said, can you tell me who's gone to Kitchener-Waterloo and where you sent them? Easiest thing in the world. Watch this. He goes, sits down and types. Out comes this roll of paper. There's a lot of people going to Kitchener-Waterloo. But when you look at where they're going, they're all going to the Mennonite churches. No Anglicans, no United Church, Presbyterians, forget it. And it turned out the Mennonites had a team out in Thailand. And they struck a deal with our people. If you think you need to turn a refugee down, before you turn them down, come to us. We'll try and find a sponsor so you can take them all in. So all these notifications were coming in with all these people going to Kitchener, so the matchers said, well, they're all going, we'll have to send people to other places. Well, the next month we flooded Kitchener-Waterloo. They were up to here in refugees by the time we got through with it. But with that, we were actually able to manage the system. Have we managed to get it?
Yeah.
Or can we have to go ahead? Good. No, I'm doing just fine. If I stop, I'll get tired.
I see it in here, but it doesn't
go up there. So, okay. So what do we have to talk about next? The big difficulty with this program, and I hope we can show you some of the images, was that we were dealing with people in 9 different jurisdictions: Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, Philippines, Hong Kong, Macau,
Okinawa, and one or two others. And the refugees were in over 70 different camps. And refugees couldn't come to us. We had to go to them. In every other refugee movement we have had, even the one in Uganda, even the ones in Syria, we would set up a central processing place and the refugees could come to us. In all those countries, the authorities wouldn't let anybody out of those camps until they had visa in hand. And that was the problem we had. So, how do you get to those camps? Well, if you're on the, if your refugees are going to, so here we are, okay, so, oh yes, now this is what the different offices produced. The interesting thing was I had a talk with the men and women who delivered the recent Syrian program. They brought in 45,000 people in 3 months. And they said, so, and how many did you bring? And I said, well, 60,000. How long did it take? They said, I said, 18 months. They said, well, look at who did the better job. So I said, how many people did you have working out there? 500. How many people did we have out there? 24. What did you have? They had the most powerful immigration computer system in the world. We had something called a ballpoint pen and carbon paper. That's how we ran our program, okay? And so these okay, can we get things? Okay. So, 70 different camps. You'll know the names of these. I think they might come. And this is, now this is how we got to the camps. Go ahead to the next one. That is the names of 60 at the end. This is how, for the first eight or 10 months, we got to those island camps. They would rent a Malaysian fishing boat. You can see the luxurious seating at the back. And you'd get a boat that 3 days before was carrying fish and diesel oil. 3 hours to get to Pulau Bedong. 3 hours in the back of one of these things. In the initial stages, there was no wharf at Pulau Bedong. So they'd come in as close as they could, and the boys and girls would go over the side up to here. They would carry their briefcases and stuff ashore. They would come back and they'd carry all the forms ashore, and then they would go to work. But later there was a wharf, so that took one part of the way. Now this is the typical working conditions. This is John McKechnie, who's retired in Vancouver, and the fellow in the striped shirt. When the book came out, his family happened to get a copy of the book, and they spotted their father. That's their father sitting there, and we've subsequently linked up the father with John, and apparently they had a long, sobby conversation. Now, John is there working away in his classic immigration uniform, shorts and flip-flops and whatnot. They would work from the time the sun got up. They would be out on that island for 5 working days, 4 nights. They would work at these desks all day long. There were oil lamps that they would use, and they would work until they couldn't keep their eyes open. They would work. At the end of the day, they would hang a mosquito net above that table, and they would put the briefcase on the table to be the pillow, and they would get up on the table, and then so you would sleep. And they would do that night after night after night. Now that wasn't so bad, but it was the rats. It was the rats that sometimes got under the nets. So that was how it happened. That was the great night's sleep, I'll tell you. And then you wake up in the morning with bread, and if you were lucky enough to be in a Vietnamese camp, there was always fresh bread. It's always fresh bread, sometimes cooked in a tin can, but there's always great fresh bread and green tea. Initially they took soft drinks, but you opened a soft drink and it would be covered with flies. And green tea didn't attract flies. Attracted. So they really knew what it was like to be a refugee, because they were living like. And the final insult to them was when they got back to their offices, where the local staff would start processing this immigration. The soft paper that the forms were made of had absorbed the smells of the camp. So the camp came with you back to the office. And this is what they did for 18 months. Now, in some places in Thailand, there were lots of other different challenges. We'll try. Thanks for sticking with us. This is about refugees. It's tough stuff, so you have to be prepared for various things to happen. So that part of the work was really very complicated, very difficult. Looking back, we discovered that the average age of our visa officers who were sent out there was 26 years, and the average manager was 31 years. But what it meant was a 26-year-old officer had been trained and had one posting already, so he or she knew the business. And what you needed were people who were young and tough and with a strong sense of adventure. I guess the other thing that we learned from them really soon was how to turn these things on and off. Was how much they came to admire the refugees. They said it was the smiles and it was the singing. When the refugees left the camp, there was always a song that was sung. Most of our guys could
That's
still...
right, yeah, that's a song. It's
Okay.
That's a song all the time when you leave the camp. Việt nhớ.
So several of our people can still sing those songs to you. So that says something about the bond that was related, and there was lots of questions about, are people telling you the truth or not telling you the truth? For the most part, they believed they were being told the truth. And besides, what did they need to know? What's your name? Who are these people with you? Do you know anyone in Canada? What was your occupation? What else do you need to know? So there was no need for people to elaborate to embroider their stories. And in fact, in several of the offices, the supervisors told the officers, you always tell the same questions in the same order. So if they've memorized them, they can tell you the answer even if they don't understand what they're saying. They've made an effort to prepare. We're not going to try and trip them up. So the spirit of the thing was really quite good. Treat, do you think we can push on to another slide?
Yeah, okay.
So that's Mr. McEachern. I'm having lunch with him the day after tomorrow. This is Margaret Tebbett. Now, she did a lot of the training of the officers, and she was out at the beginning, and then she was out later. And she really didn't like the rats on her feet. I mean, she's a very fine, capable, strong woman, but she always tells me, rats running over my feet? No, you don't want that. So, anyways, she's a fantastic person. Okay, next one, please. And now this is another one of the great stories. This gentleman there with the beard is Leo Verboven. He's a Dutch immigrant himself. Came as a child, and Leo was sent to a camp in Nan province on the north of Thailand because there was a 13-member Hmong family there whose relatives had been picked up by the Mennonites somewhere else and were already in Kitchener. Okay, so Leo goes up there with instructions. See if you can find that family. Well, there was no such thing as a table in that camp. There was no such thing as a chair. But Leo did find this bench, and so he set up his office there. And of course, while he's there, this is the only entertainment going on in the camp. So there's Leo and the family, but he's surrounded by a couple of 1,000 other people who are there to see the show. And Leo is putting the story together, and out from under the table comes that. Under the bench comes that. So the fellow with the stick whacks it, and then says to Leo, since you provided this, would you like to come home for dinner? In the book, Leo talks about how he graciously turned down the invitation, and to his regret, because he knew that if he had the meal there, his manager would cancel his per diem for that evening. So, as I said, we were dealing in 9 different countries, and we had this is one. At the end, we had to charter 181 planes. They came across the Pacific to Edmonton, they came across the Atlantic to Montreal, and we had to match, through this system, we had to match 80% of the people on those planes with the sponsors, because the real story was the sponsors. and if we could get most of the refugees into the hands of the private people, we could deal with the government assisted later. So that was what we tried to do at that stage. And there's the choice. The airlines were absolutely fantastic. They all appointed special crews to look after the refugees, and there's some of them that are still in contact with people that they carried. Ward Air was particularly good. They made their hangar available in Edmonton available free of charge to all the other airlines when the weather turned bad. Okay. So we did the matching. Next one. So 4,000 matches a month, and that was a really, you know, what would the group. I'll go to the next one, please. Here's the matching team. These are the people that did the matching. There were two more who were away that day. And here was the trick. Each one of them, as these notification of arrival telexes came in, sometimes with 500 names or more. 542, by the way, was the record. If you get a lot of families with babies, you could really pack them in there. And the story that comes out from the officers is that, like with the Singapore officers, they were running an airlift out of Singapore for people from Indonesia and out of KL, Kuala Lumpur, for the refugees from Malaysia. So with 8 officers, you know, so that meant, and the trick was you had to load them in the middle of the night because you wanted to get the plane into the air while the air was cooler. If you have to take off when the sun was up, you'd have to stop in Tokyo for fuel. So you had to go. So they'd be loading people at 3 o'clock in the morning and expected in the office at 7:30. And that was young, tough officers we're looking for. And the story is that it was. We had lots of cooperation from International Operation for Migrations and all sorts of other organizations. But the business of making sure the right people were getting on the plane, that was the Canadians did. And they stood there with the list and checked them off as they came on. And then you had to go back on the plane and do a second count. Well, by the time the refugees got on the plane, the babies had all changed, gone to other mothers, under people's shirts, here and there. Eventually, they used to have to say, "Hold up the babies," and they would count all the babies, and then they would count everybody else. Otherwise, you'd be there all night, because as babies appeared and disappeared at various places. And then there was the question of, did the people know how to use the toilets? But that's another story. So ultimately, they would arrive in these 2 reception centers, one here in Edmonton at Greaseback Barracks, and the other one in Montreal at Long Point. And the military did an absolutely astonishing job for the refugees. It's just quite amazing. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is you can tell that those refugees came through Hong Kong. And you know how you can tell? Because one of them has a suit. The refugees were allowed to work in Hong Kong, and so they were making money. And they were going to a new country, and they wanted to look their best. When the first flight arrived here, the immigration officers were so confused. You know, who are these people in their 3-piece suits and their boom boxes? But they just want, and I had to come out and say, you know, they want to look their best. They want to, wouldn't you? Because most, you know, from other places, people arrived in a t-shirt and flip-flops and a pair of shorts. So this is the, so that's, again, and here's another, this again is in the gymnasium, I think in Greaseback. And this is where they're being processed for landing and oriented and issued clothing. There's an interesting story comes up. Health and Welfare insisted, Health and Welfare and the medical authorities of the province said, people have to be given a shower as soon as they arrive. And the Immigration Department didn't like that, but it turned out it was wildly popular with the refugees. They'd been on a flight for 20 hours, they'd been in a refugee camp forever. The chance to have a shower was just fantastic. What we didn't know was that the Health and Welfare also said, when they go into the shower, they got to drop their undies into a bin, and you have to destroy them and then give them new underclothing. Okay, we didn't know that. So one day, I get a telegram from the manager at Greaseback, who was the politest, most deferential fellow you'd ever find, and it said, "Molloy, if you insist on us taking the undies away from these people in future, we're boxing them up and sending them personally to your home." So I thought, there's probably something going wrong out there. So as soon as the sun came up in Alberta, I called him and said, "Hi, Guy, I gather there's a bit of a problem." Like he says. The story was 2 o'clock, it's February, okay, February 1980. I understand it's chilly in Edmonton in February 1980, 2 o'clock in the morning. And he gets a call from the military police at Griesbach Barracks. There's something horrible going on in the barracks. All the lights are on, the people are up, there's a lot of noise. We can't, all the interpreters have gone home. We don't know what's going on. You better get an interpreter and get out here because we're afraid there's going to be a riot. So he gets up, gets his clothes on, gets his car started, 2 o'clock in the morning, drives across town, gets the interpreter out of bed. They drive out to Griesbach Barracks. There's all sorts of anxious policemen waiting for them, and of course the lights are on, there's noise, they make their way in, and they eventually get to the epicenter of the disturbance. There's a barracks room, a family weeping, the mother is on the floor, crying her eyes out, and she's been molested, or, what the hell's going on here? So they get her calmed down, they get everybody calmed down, and the interpreter says, "Now, what's the problem?" Well, here's the problem. This was a fairly well-off family, middle-class family. Before they left, they sold everything, and they bought a rather large, high-quality diamond. And they sewed it into Mama's bra. And Mama's bra survived the escape across the waters, months in the camp. It survived the flight to Canada, but it didn't survive the shower. She was so relieved to have the shower, she just threw the bra in the bin with everything else. So Guy knew that these things were put in the camp incinerator. So he said, where's the underwear from the flight that came in today? Well, it turned out it was in a dumpster in one of the hangars. So Guy goes out with the policeman, and there's a dumpster. 500 people, lots of underwear. So they dump it out on the barracks floor, and they get broom handles, and they go through and they gather up. Well, the bras are pretty easy to identify compared to others. And then they have to sit down, and eventually they find one with a little lump in it, and then return it to the family. So that comes under the heading of performs other duties as required. But anyways, those reception centers were absolute marvels. And our philosophy with this is you let the managers manage. We told the team in Edmonton and we told the team in Montreal, these are the tasks. And we left them to do. The processes were totally different. But they all got the same thing done, but one worked according to the way Quebecers like to work, one worked the way the prairie people like to work, quite different. The interesting thing, another interesting thing is because of the sponsors, we were able to distribute the refugees right across Canada. Over 100 communities got them, including Tukto Yuktup, although he didn't stay very long. One of the ones that went to Yellowknife runs the biggest cleaning company in Yellowknife right now. But the biggest number, of course, went to Ontario, second to Quebec. The prairie provinces were expected to take a total of about 13%. They took close to 25%. The people in the prairies, the churches in the prairies, really came through. Really quite amazing. Now, there was an enormous amount of secondary migration, of course, but the initial impact was spread across the country, and as a result, we didn't we didn't destroy the services in the big cities because if you look at the next one, the blue is the big cities, the orangey color is the rest of the country. So the rest of the country took a big chunk of the initial load, and that made a difference. And when people then moved later, they moved for reasons. They moved to Toronto because they had a cousin there. They moved from Edmonton to Vancouver because there was a big pot industry there. There's lots of... We didn't know all this till I got here. Anyways, in the movement, the people from Vietnam were far and away the largest group, 42,000. But in that, you have to distinguish between about 30% were Vietnamese Chinese, and the rest were ethnic Vietnamese. Not about 10,000 Laotians and a smaller number of Cambodians. And who the others are, I have no idea. Coding errors. I'm sure there's no Poles and there's no Lithuanians in that. So, just a few of the things that we learned from the teams, because they drove it, okay? All we did was say, our instruction was very simple. You will have 7 747s in the month of June. That's all you need. That's all we need to tell you. Everything else is up to you. So, since we couldn't micromanage the operation from Ottawa, the style of management that the managers took was the same. If you had a little team of officers off in some camp off the coast of Malaysia or deep in Indonesia, they wouldn't have any way of communicating with you. So people had to be empowered, and the mantra was, do the thing right, but do the right thing. Do the thing right, but do the right thing. And when you have a choice, do the right thing. If you have to choose. And that's pretty well the way they did. So the charters drove it. The other thing, we sent out an instruction just before the big break, and we basically said, you've got to categorize the families like we do in Canada. Father, mother, kids. Father, mother, kids. But we said, you will leave no family member behind. If they've got granny gets her own file. If there's family friends with them, grab them, because we want them all to go to the same community. We know that they'll do better if they leave no one behind. And when we went into the files, we were really quite amazed to discover all this correspondence between Singapore, Bangkok, Hong Kong, and a few other places saying, we've got a family here who said that part of their family made it to your territory, what do you know about them? And the answer would come back, oh, they left 2 weeks ago, they're in Lethbridge. So they would send the next ones on. And keeping you don't want to criticize what others did, because the Yanks and the Australians did a lot of work, but they adhered to extremely rigid family definitions. We did the files rigidly, but we grabbed the whole grain whenever we had a chance. We couldn't do it there were cases where where there was tuberculosis in the family, and the family had to decide whether part of it could go and others will stay with the sick person until they're done. But those were the only exceptions that we made. Was that if part of the family can be brought to Canada, fine. Don't lose track of where they've gone. And then, as I said, fly by night. You had to get everybody into the air before the sun came up, or else you had to stop in Tokyo, and that doubled the cost of the flight. The numbers, the breakdown, the private sponsor took 32,000. Whoops. Okay, I can almost do this in my head. Government sponsored were in the 20,000 area. What, next one? Okay, leave it there. But at the end of the day, the private sponsors took the biggest group. There were about 1,700 that were sponsored by family, and the remainder became government-assisted refugees. And that's the way we did it. The reasons that this thing worked was we had this amazing leadership. And it was when we got into the files, it was amazing and we put it in the book, to watch Flora MacDonald in the month before. 1 week she's in Tokyo at the G7 meeting, talking to all the world leaders about, we're here for economics, but what are we going to do about this? And 3 days later, she's in a basement of a church in Kitchener, talking to the local Mennonite community about what's going on, and the thing that was really amazing to watch on the time was the way the national leaders were empowered by local leaders. Mayor Marion Doer in Ottawa, who said when the government said, well, we got 4,000 to go at one stage, in the early stages, she said, well, we'll take them all. Thus was born for Project 4,000. And I went to the meeting that she called, and I got there early and helped them put out, she said, we'll need maybe 100, 150 chairs. We put out 1,000 chairs and people were standing. But her and Howard Edelman in Toronto, who established Operation Lifeline, any number of parish committee leaders, priests, ministers, others who stepped forward and organized locally. And it was interesting to watch the power flow from the grassroots up to the federal ministers. The more we saw leadership at the local level, the more power the federal ministers had to beat down the other ministers who were worried about the costs and that sort of thing. So that was really important. The other thing that was worked for us was this idea that the immigration department was given a license to innovate by the deputy minister. I told you about how he got us this computer, but in the spring, that first spring after we agreed to 5,000, a guy who'd been in Uganda with me was sent out to help put several thousand people into the process in Malaysia. And when he came back, and then he went on to run the operation in Hong Kong, but when he came back, he came to me and he said, "Look, Mike, we have 12 minutes to talk to these people, if you want us to hit the numbers." And he said, "It takes us 10 minutes to fill in the forms." So we got 2 minutes to talk to the people and 10 minutes to gather all the information the normal immigration system requires. So I said, "Well, let's go see the assistant deputy minister," and happily the assistant deputy minister liked Jerry. He didn't like anybody else, but liked Jerry. And he said, let's go see the deputy minister, Mr. Mannion. Now Mannion, 20 years before, had run the Hungarian movement, when the medical examination looked like this. Yep. I'm not kidding. Turn them around. Count the legs. So he knew about this thing. So we go up to see Mr. Mannion, and Jerry is talking about the boxes and boxes of files that had to be taken out and all the forms that had to be filled in. And Mannion listened to it for about 5 minutes and picked up the phone, and he called the head of we had a business practice group in Manpower and Immigration, and he said, "Herb, get up here. I want you up here. Jerry, tell him what the problem is." And Mannion turned to Herb and said, "By Friday there'll be a solution for me to sign off on." So they came up with this idea of a 2-page form with carbon paper in between. You captured the boat number and the family, who's in the family, and then you tore it had a number on it. There was a number on the bottom. You tore off the stub and gave it to, there's your file number. You went back to headquarters, to your office. Medical went in, security went in, flight number went in, put a stamp on it, tear off the top. There's your passport and visa. And one copy stayed on the file. Just the slickest thing you ever saw. So when the word got out to the officers that the deputy minister had set aside all the normal red tape, that became our license to find better ways of doing things. And nobody ever got into trouble for cutting corners. Said sometimes things didn't work, but nobody ever got into trouble for that. So then it goes without saying, at the end of the day, there were 7,500 sponsorships filed by Canadian groups across the country. 7,500. Minimum size of a group would be 10 active people. Could be neighbors, could be a congregation. You could be a group of 5, with no affiliation, or you could be part of a church group or something like that. So we figure close to 1 million Canadians were involved in a hands-on way, and maybe another million, who knows how many were throwing money in the collection plate. So the tremendous public support and participation, never seen the likes of it since. And the other thing was the media stayed on side the whole time. Even though there were attempts by private groups to, well, at one stage there were ads taken out in the newspaper saying each one of these refugees will sponsor 15 relatives, and so we're going to be flooded by people from Asia. And we didn't even have to deal with it. Dr. Howard Edelman and Dr. Larry Lamb mounted something called Operation Kneecap, and they cut their water off, and that was the end. We never heard from them again. So now the other thing that was really amazing that we saw along the way is just how determined the refugees were to succeed when they got here. I mean, when I would watch them come off the planes with the t-shirt and the shorts and the flip-flops and everything they had in a little plastic bag. Or a garbage bag. Unless they came from Hong Kong, and then they had all sorts of other stuff. But even so, no suitcases, as a rule, nothing like that. So, in any event, recently, just very recently, the United Nations University in Finland, who knew there was a United Nations University in Finland, got studies of the Vietnamese done for Germany, for the United Kingdom, for Canada, and for the United States. And the Canadian study is really good because it's very hard, because you may not know it, but when an immigrant comes to Canada, 10 years after they've been there, their file with the name taken off goes to Statistics Canada, and they can match up that file with the tax records. So you want to see how people are doing, that's where you look. So for the initial 20 years, first 20 years, the Vietnamese community was the poorest community in Canada. It had an enormous poverty gap, but an enormous high level of engagement with the labor market. They were poor, but they worked, to a very large degree. But the gap between them and the other immigrants disappeared after 20 years. Now, 5% of the people that arrived here could speak English or French well enough that they could be interviewed without a translator. So that means 95%, a lot of kids, 95% spoke no English or French. So the 20-year catch-up period is not unusual. And by the end of 20 years, they caught up with all the other American groups, and by the end of the 30th year, your community has surpassed the other in terms of educational attainment, engagement in professions, and income. It's one of the most successful groups in Canada, and that's not because that you got that somebody gave you handouts. That's because the community did it itself. The kids that came as refugees have two really interesting statistics. They have the highest dropout rate of any group in Canada, and they have the highest university completion rate of any group in Canada. Which it was really, astonishing to see that they were both the best and the worst in terms of finishing school. And they now outperform all other childhood immigrants and Canadian children born at the same age. They are the top of our society. So that says something about the kind of people that came to this country and what they've accomplished in the years since. And when I talk to my colleagues who were involved and they've read the book and they've read the study, they say, well, all that work was really worth it, wasn't it? Really worth it. So thank you for your patience with both me and the technology. Thank you.
Ông Molloy đã có xong cái bài nói chuyện của ông và rất là hay. Mình biết có rất là nếu các bạn có những cái câu hỏi nào mà cho ông Molloy thì các bạn có thể hỏi. Yeah, this is a question period. Anyone who has any question that wants to ask Mr. Molloy, then please do so. Yeah, Thần.
I just want to express my deepest gratitude for what you did for the Vietnamese community, and I was one of them. And because of your work, that the Canadian history will not forget about us. It's very important that your work will mark the beginning of our journeys in.
First, I want to thank you for everything you've done. If it wasn't for you and everyone else, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law would not have been able to come here to Edmonton, and I would never have been able to meet my wife because of that. So thank you for that, I really appreciate it.
Interact.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Malone, here you go.
Kính thưa Việt, tôi Phong mua cái quyển sách này về để tìm hiểu thêm về những cái lịch sử mà ông Michael viết ở trong đây và những cái câu chuyện quý giá mà tôi Phong cần phải tìm hiểu. Cảm ơn quý vị mua sách và ủng hộ tác giả. Quý vị có thể mua online hoặc ở trên Amazon.
Cảm ơn Vietbest TV. Tôi là Hoàng Đình Trí. Tôi rất là may mắn đã được gặp ông Molloy trong nhiều cái event trước. Đây là một cái dịp mà chúng tôi thấy là cái quyển sách này rất là quan trọng đối với giới trẻ, nhất để muốn cho các cháu tìm hiểu về cái cội nguồn của mình. Nên là chúng tôi thấy là đây là một dịp để mà chúng ta tìm hiểu một cái nhìn khác, và bên cạnh cái nhìn của chúng ta là những người đi tị nạn thì những người đã cứu vớt chúng ta, thì đây tôi nghĩ là một cái dịp để chúng ta tìm hiểu được thêm những cái khó khăn và những cái công lao của họ, mà chúng ta càng thấy rằng là chúng ta là những người may mắn nhất được đến đây và đất nước Canada này đón tiếp. Cái quyển sách này nó rất là hữu dụng để mà tương lai các cháu nếu mà có dịp nào đó muốn tìm hiểu về cái quá khứ cội nguồn của chúng ta thì có thể các cháu sẽ có dịp đọc lại hết tất cả những chuyện mà nhiều khi bố mẹ cũng không biết được hết. Cảm ơn.
Running on Empty là một quyển sách dày 582 trang do 4 tác giả, trong đó có ông Michael Molloy, đã ghi lại cuộc hành trình của nhiều công chức Canada, những người đã bước chân đến 70 trại tị nạn tại các vùng hẻo lánh ở châu Á. Tại đó, họ làm việc vất vả ngày đêm với công việc phỏng vấn các thuyền nhân. Trong những ngày tháng đồng hành cùng các người tị nạn, nhóm người tị nạn lớn nhất là người Việt và người Việt gốc Hoa, sau đó là người Miên và người Lào. Họ sống trong hoàn cảnh cực kỳ thiếu thốn. Ông Michael Molloy từng là điều phối viên của chương trình nhập cư tại Ottawa vào thập niên 1970. Lúc đó ông dưới 30 tuổi và làm việc dưới quyền Bộ trưởng Ron Arkin. Trong một cuộc phỏng vấn ở Ottawa, ông May cho biết, mùa thu năm 1978, số thuyền nhân tị nạn từ Việt Nam đến Mã Lai Á, Indonesia và Hồng Kông tăng vọt. Trong tháng 5 và tháng 6 năm 1979, có hơn 100.000 người tràn ngập tại các trại tị nạn. Liên Hiệp Quốc mô tả tình huống này là cuộc khủng hoảng tị nạn tồi tệ nhất kể từ đệ nhị thế chiến và cảnh cáo nếu Hoa Kỳ, Canada và Úc không bắt đầu nhận thêm người thì hàng ngàn người có thể chết thương tâm. Thế rồi mùa thu năm 1979, tại một cuộc họp của Liên Hiệp Quốc, Ngoại trưởng Canada là bà Flora McDonald đã tuyên bố Canada sẽ tái định cư cho 50.000 người. Báo chí và truyền hình lúc bấy giờ đưa tin về thuyền nhân đã tạo nên một ảnh hưởng lớn. Ông Michael Molloy nhớ lại rằng Bộ trưởng Ron Arkin bị tác động bởi cuốn sách mà ông đọc, None is Too Many. Nội dung nói về người Canada từng quay lưng với người tị nạn Do Thái thời đệ nhị thế chiến. Bộ trưởng Ron Arkin hỏi các đồng nghiệp, chúng ta muốn thế giới nhắc tới như thế nào? Lập tức sau đó, viên chức phòng cấp visa Bộ Ngoại giao được cử tới vùng Đông Nam Á vào cuối tháng 8 năm đó và đầu tháng 10 họ bắt đầu đưa người tị nạn Việt Nam sang Canada. Trung bình mỗi tháng 5.000 người. Ông May cho biết, lúc đó người tị nạn ở rải rác trong 70 trại của 9 quốc gia khác nhau. Do đó, người của ông phải thuê các phương tiện khác nhau kể cả trực thăng để đến các trại tị nạn. Ông May nhớ lại nhóm viên chức chương trình di cư thực sự tuyệt vời. Họ làm việc độc lập nhưng có hiệu quả. Thời đó không có Internet, không computer, không điện thoại di động, rất ít liên lạc với Ottawa, nhưng mỗi ngày họ có thể phỏng vấn 100 người. Họ làm việc theo 3 nguyên tắc. Không bao giờ chia cắt gia đình, không bao giờ cho phi cơ cất cánh nếu vẫn còn một chỗ trống, làm tất cả mọi điều tốt nhất trong khả năng cho người tị nạn. Running on Empty ghi lại rất nhiều chi tiết về các chương trình bảo trợ của chính phủ và người dân Canada trong những năm cuối của thập niên 1970. Trong những năm cuối của thập niên 70 và đầu những năm 80. Trong đó năm 1979, Thủ tướng Joe Clark đã ký sắc lệnh cho phép 60.000 thuyền nhân Việt Nam sống trong các trại tị nạn Á Châu được sang định cư. Chương trình định cư tại Canada cho những người tị nạn đông như được khởi đầu từ dân chúng và chính phủ Canada. Có rất nhiều công chức trong Bộ Di trú Canada thuộc chính phủ liên bang và tỉnh bang nhờ có sự phối hợp phi thường giữa dân chúng. Các nhà thờ, các quan chức, các nhóm tư nhân cùng làm việc với chính phủ để bảo trợ những người tị nạn định cư. Sự kết hợp giữa các đối tác trong việc giải quyết khó khăn nghiêm trọng đã là một hiện tượng thần kỳ vô cùng đặc biệt. Chỉ có đất nước giàu lòng nhân đạo như Canada mà thôi. Sau 40 năm định cư, người Việt Nam đã trở thành những công dân thành tựu. Nhiều người tin rằng chương trình Người tị nạn Việt Nam tạo nguồn cảm hứng cho chương trình Người tị nạn Sierra ngày nay. Câu chuyện của thuyền nhân Việt Nam và vai trò của nhân viên chương trình nhập cư Canada cũng được đưa vào cuốn Heritage Minute đã được phát hành vào năm 2017. Trong thời gian gần đây, truyền thông Canada đã đăng nhiều bài viết về người tị nạn Việt Nam, gợi nhắc tinh thần bao dung độ lượng mà chính phủ Canada từng áp dụng đối với người tị nạn Đông Dương, khi người tị nạn từ các quốc gia hiện nay đang ngập tràn trong bom lửa chiến tranh, nhất là trong thời kỳ chính phủ Hoa Kỳ không còn xem trọng việc cứu giúp người nhập cư.